Breakpoint this week is not a political podcast. So, John, I want to turn now to Tim Walz. He is Vice President Harris chose the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, to be her running mate this week. We don't need to talk about this from a political perspective, but it is important what his policy views are and what his worldview is. And I will just say one of the things I've been struck by this week in watching this news unfold is how little we seem to care culturally what people's actual policies are. I don't think Vice President Harris has had a press conference yet since her candidacy has been announced where she's answered questions about policy. I saw this morning that she does not have a policy section on her website. A lot of, I don't mean to be tongue in cheek here, but a lot of our politics around this presidential race seem to be based on vibes. And I find that really disconcerting in the same way that I feel anxious about not knowing if we have a competent president right now. Because if you look, I mean, a lot of the coverage about Tim Walz as the Minnesota governor and now the VP pick under Harris is about, just what he seems like. He seems like a cool, quirky dad, and we're going to make lots of cheeky jokes about how he's just a regular dude and he's cool and we like him. And this goes back to the whole, he seems like somebody I could have a beer with kind of thing that people used to say about Obama. And it feels icky to me on a couple levels. First is that it feels like whenever something like this happens, like the notes go out to everybody and suddenly these are the talking points, and every progressive person you'll hear some version of the same thing, which is that he was a football coach and he taught math or whatever. And he was for school lunches and he's a cool guy. And something about that just is eerie to me. But drilling down into some of his policies, they are incredibly progressive. I mean, that's what we'd expect from somebody that Vice President Harris picks to be her running mate. But especially on things like transgender issues, including parental rights, on abortion, on economics. What do you think about this pick?
Yeah, I think there's a couple aspects to it. I think the policy positions are obviously the ones we want to get to, and there's a little bit of a lack of clarity, as you said. And, as we spent a lot of time on this with President Trump and the vice presidential nominee on the Republican side, J.D. Vance, and the move of the Republican platform and the role that President Trump had in the move away from very clear pro-life language, from historic pro-life commitments, and also moving on definitions of the family. And, look, this is clearly a calculated move, thinking that in order to pull some folks from the middle, there's going to, and win some of these swing states, that they're going to have to tone down the rhetoric on abortion, and they're going to have to tone down the rhetoric on, kind of the historic social conservative issues. Problem is that you can't be a conservative if you don't have things to conserve, and you can't be a conservative if you don't have the right things to conserve. And there's nothing more fundamentally right than this definition of the human person and protecting the dignity of all people, and also marriage as a pre-political institution that is a foundational bedrock of society that has a particular definition and doesn't change with the social winds. It's, as we said a number of times here, it's gravity, not a speed limit. But before we get to that on this other side and looking at kind of the worldview implications about what are the issues, it's important to say this was a interesting pick. Look, and I think the most important thing up front is why was it the governor of Minnesota, not the governor of Pennsylvania? And that sounds like a political observation up front. I don't think it is. I think it's an ideological one. The smart money was on Josh Shapiro. And the reason is because Pennsylvania is winnable and Pennsylvania is necessary for the Harris campaign. The calculation here is that it's going to cause a problem with the far left side of the party because of, really, is this pointing to, and I think this is a legitimate question. Now, by the way, not just a question I'm asking, not just a question, some folks who are conspiratorial are asking. Jake Tapper asked this in pretty uncertain terms on CNN. Is this reflecting the deeper anti-Semitism that the Dems have a problem with, particularly when it comes to the current war between Israel and Gaza, and Gaza and with Hamas. Man, the smart money's not here. Now, there's some other explanations, and I want to acknowledge that. I heard one yesterday that I thought that's an interesting explanation, and that is that really the Dems have given up on this one. They don't think they can win. They're trying to mitigate the damage down ticket. And along with that, maybe, and I think there's a legitimate story here that Shapiro said no. He was asked and he said no. I don't know. There's rumors about that. No idea. That's to get into the rumors is to get into the political side of this, I think, in a way that's not helpful. I don't know. He's got a bright political future. One of the, folks at the Editors Podcast at National Review said he's better at this than she is, and so he would outshine her on the campaign trail. That's not something she's going to tolerate. Again, that's political analysis. I don't know. But I think what's obvious, Shapiro's Jewish. He was pretty clear on the campus protests, and that's not a popular thing with segments of the party. And there was a risk of bringing him on board and also dealing already with the fact that there's a lot of people grumpy with the way Biden has handled this on the far left. And I again, is this another area in which the parties are moving further and further apart? I think it's really interesting. And at the root of this is a deep anti-Semitism. Israel's right to exist and, everything that entails with the current conflict. So that to me is what's interesting. It is important to note, and it wouldn't have been much better with Shapiro than with the choice that was made. But the policies here on abortion, the policies here on marriage, the policies here on pushing trans ideology through schools, that stuff, we've never seen a ticket like this. This is the most, radical anti-child ticket that we have ever seen. Mm-hmm. And I know this week you brought attention to, and I've been talking with Katy Faust, who's putting this book together, and it's coming up here in a couple weeks is when it's being released. Katy Faust, of course, the founder of Them Before Us. She's guest hosted. She sat in for you when you were, and I know she typically listens. So, hey, Katy, is putting together a pro-child policy book. In other words, what if we rethought all of our policy along this line of this framework that she's given us, which is kids before adults? Like, we put the rights and well-being of kids before us, and how would that play out? Well, listen, I can't imagine. And again, the temptation is to look at this and say, okay, this is just, policy stuff, politics stuff, an excuse to go right, excuse to go conservative. No, listen, it's not even close right now. And particularly with this ticket and what we do know that this governor has done, he brags about Nancy Pelosi telling him to calm down on his pro-abortion rhetoric. And again, how relevant actually are the vice presidents? Both of the vice presidential candidates right now are getting way more attention than they, than
right.
What is merited, based on the role that the vice president plays. I always go back to Hamilton, on this. There's that line in Hamilton when Hamilton's wife is trying to, get him to take the summer off, and he says, hey, John Adams takes the summer off. And he's like, John Adams doesn't have a real job. The vice president is not really a thing. That's not exactly true. Okay. It's a funny line, but it's not exactly true. But there's far more attention being leveled here. And I want to be mindful of that. But Harris is not a policy candidate, Yeah. There's an ideological commitment that will then be carried out through the sort of policy things that, someone who's been a governor versus someone who's been a senator is going to look really different. And so I don't want to give too much attention, but at the same time, this was the choice, and it matters, and it does reflect some things, I think.